All right, so this is where we left off. We left off talking about decision making and judgments and how things can cloud our judgments. And if you didn't notice the cartoon, we've got bald, overweight guy making a muscle, but he doesn't have any. And then in the mirror, he sees himself as totally ripped and full head of hair. And yeah. Anyway, so language is another thing that we use with our cognitive abilities, and how we develop those languages and the ability to use language is pretty unique. Children, when they are developing their language skills, go from extremely basic to very, very complicated. And it takes kind of a long time to get to the very, very complicated part. In the beginning, children, babies, newborns do a lot of cooing, and then that leads into babbling. Babbling is not using words, it's practicing making sounds with their mouth. If the child is in a household that speaks Mongolian, they will make babbling sounds like their parents are making when they speak Mongolian. Same with English, same with Japanese, same with Italian. All of the different languages have, slightly different sounds that you have to learn how to make, and that begins at babbling. Okay. Eventually, after 4 months, they enter the babbling stage. After about 10 months, their babbling has begun to change, and we start to hear repeated sounds of that language over and over and over again until we finally get its first word. And it is a one word at a time thing. So entire sentences can be based on mama. Okay. Oh, you want that? Okay. And then eventually you get into 2 words. Mama, milk. Okay, you want some milk. I firmly believe, from my own experiences, that a lot of the crying and the carrying on and wailing that children have, infants especially, is because of the fact that they can't communicate their thoughts to you. They want something and you're not giving it to them because you don't understand them, and they are trying so hard, and it's really, really frustrating for them to not be understood. Eventually, after you have you start developing words, okay, it ends up being about a word a week to about a word a day that the child is learning. So the vocabulary of the child explodes at about 18 months, because suddenly they go from being able to learn a word in a week to a word in a day to several words in a day. And then they can really start communicating more and more easily. Okay. By about 2 years old, they start to telegraph their speech together. Dada up, mama down. That they're telegraphing the words to you. They're not really using correct grammar, but that's because they don't have all of the words to be able to do that. But they are able to get their meaning across. Now, for my daughter, when she started learning how to speak, she was, I don't want to say advanced because I don't want to make it sound like, oh my God, my child was so advanced. But she was pretty quick to pick up on babbling. She didn't wait to get going. She was babbling not right from the beginning, obviously, that would be weird. But pretty early. And then she started picking up words, and she has a pretty extensive vocabulary and is getting better and better at it every single day, to the point where she'll say something and I kind of look at my wife and I'm like, when did she learn that? I didn't teach that to her. I don't know. Well, I'm glad she knows it. Well, for now I am as well, but If she's still this way as a teenager, I may have to slap her. But eventually, once we have developed a larger and larger vocabulary, we can begin to use the rules of grammar to clarify our speech. For example, right now, anything that happened in the past, whether it be 5 minutes ago or 3 years ago, to my daughter is yesterday. If she wants to tell you that something happened a couple of weeks ago, it's yesterday I went to the zoo. And it's like, no, you didn't go to the zoo yesterday. The zoo has been closed since March, so we haven't gone to the zoo. No, yesterday I went to the zoo. Everything is yesterday. And also, and I don't know if she's just, particularly woke or whatever, but she calls all females him and all males her. And I have to kind of correct her a lot because she's, is that, what's his name? Her name is Maggie. Oh, what's her name? His name is Bart. What is wrong with you? Okay. I think she just got mixed up somewhere and we're going to have to fix that eventually. Okay. But we start understanding each other a little bit better when we start adding some of those grammar rules. Okay. Now, linguist, okay, a person who studies language, Noam Chomsky, we've talked about him before. He's the guy who came up with the idea of the language acquisition device that we talked about during our development unit back in November-ish. Okay. He argued that all languages share a universal grammar. Okay. Thus, all human languages have the same building blocks. And we as humans have a built-in readiness to learn grammatical rules. Okay. That language acquisition device that we talked about. We are not born with the ability to learn only one language, however. If we are not exposed to language by the age of about 7, we begin to lose the ability to learn any language for our entire lives. Okay. After the language window closes, even learning a second language is difficult, if not completely and totally impossible. Now, for me, I didn't start taking a second language because I grew up in Seattle, and Seattle is not what you would call, well, it is now, but back when I was a kid, Seattle was not particularly ethnically diverse. We'll put it politely. My high school was 96% white, 4% other. So we didn't have a lot of, people speaking different languages around us. And the small population of people that we had all spoke different languages. So it wasn't like you were walking down the hallways, hearing somebody speaking Spanish or French or whatever, unless, of course, they were studying for their French class, their Spanish class, or what have you. I started taking language classes when I was in 9th grade. So this is long after that language acquisition window has closed. I took 2 years of German in high school, which German is a very, very closely related language to English. English is a Germanic language. So they are both very similar to one another. They have similar sounds. They have similar vocabularies, yada, yada, yada. I took 2 years in high school, and then I had to take 2 more years in college. And I remember almost nothing. Mostly because of the fact that I've never been required to use any German whatsoever. But also the simple fact of language is not really a strong suit of mine because of the fact that language acquisition window closed when I turned about 7 or 8 years old. How am I trying to avoid that happening to my daughter? Well, we're trying to get my daughter to be exposed to multiple languages now. For example, my wife and my mother-in-law, they speak Farsi, which is what they speak in Iran, okay, because that's where they're from. So they speak Farsi, and my daughter is learning little bits and pieces of Farsi. My wife took many years of German in college. I know a little bit of German. We're trying to get a little bit of German into my daughter's language abilities. I learned how to speak a tiny amount of Swedish for when we went to Stockholm. I want her to get a little bit of Swedish so that she can get that. Why? Mostly just because it's kind of a fun thing, because you can say, yeah, I speak a little Swedish. Oh, you speak Swedish? Really? That's crazy. Yeah. Jag talar inte svenska, which is I don't speak Swedish. Or min bror undervisar I kinesiska, which is my brother teaches in Chinese. Yeah, those are two phrases that I learned from Duolingo, the free language acquisition app that you can get for your phone. It's worth it. If you want to learn a language or you want to get a little bit better at a language, by all means, get Duolingo. Help yourself out. Okay. But if I go back into Duolingo, I'm going to have to start back over at the beginning and build myself back up. I mean, I had like a 1 year streak every day, a little bit of Swedish, and yeah, that's all gone now. But when's the next time I'm going to Stockholm? Probably not. Probably not anytime soon. But the fact is that we as human beings do better when we start understanding and learning language at a time when we are younger. Okay, so exposing children to language is far, far better. So yeah. However, we often think about things in images instead of words. Okay, if I say think of a car, you don't think of the word car. You're probably picturing a car in your head. Mental practice is now an accepted part of training for many athletes. The University of Tennessee women's basketball team was studied, and their ability to shoot free throws was analyzed after a physical practice and a mental practice. After a physical practice, the team shot about 52%. After a mental practice, that went up to 65%. Okay. During these mental practices, players repeatedly imagined making foul shots under various conditions, including being trash talked by the opponent. So how exactly does this work? Well, after you've mastered a skill, okay, so you know how to shoot free throws, you know what the mechanics are, you know how to do it. If you're unable to physically practice, if you can mentally go through the movements, what will it feel like when I'm doing that? You're actually working out that part of your brain. That connection of neurons inside your head is getting the workout, okay? And it can actually hone your abilities that much more, okay? If you've ever seen the movie Cool Runnings, it's the story of the Jamaican bobsled team, okay? Well, when they practice, okay, because they're not getting time on the actual bobsled run, when they practice, they're doing it in their bathtub. So they all climb in and they're like, okay, turn one, turn two. And they're doing kind of a mix of a physical and a mental practice, but they are mentally going through it all the time so that they can get the movements just right, okay? So mental practice is more effective if you spend your fantasy time planning how to get somewhere rather than fantasizing about the outcome. So if you want to become a better soccer player, okay, have a mental practice, but don't have the mental practice be, this is me cheering on a crowd of people because I got, another goal. How are you going to get that goal? How are you going to weave through these people? How are you going to do, the ball movement that's necessary to be able to do that? Using your mental imagery and thinking about it will strengthen those connections and make it so that you will have an easier time when you do go out for a physical practice. Okay. ASL is another thing. And oddly enough, also, and I forgot to mention this when we talked about babbling, deaf babies babble with their hands. Okay, so they're not making sounds with their mouths because they can't hear it, but they actually are babbling with their fingers because they're trying to, do signs. and all that kind of stuff. Okay. So, yeah, and there's lots of places that offer ASL as a second language, because it really is a second language. It's not just, instantly translated into English. It's something that has to be translated into ASL, because it's not the same grammar. It's not the same rules. It's not the same, stuff. All right. The last little bit that we need to talk about is all about our animal friends. Okay. So how much do animals think? Well, long answer, more than you think. Short answer, not very much. Animals are smarter than we give them credit for. But they still can't do a lot of the complicated movements and cognition that we can do, simply because we have a ton more neurons than they do. Okay, our physical brain matter is way larger when compared to other animals. Birds, dogs, cats, they all have these tiny little heads with these tiny little brains inside. And we have these gigantic heads with these gigantic brains that take up a huge amount of our energy. And it makes it so that we can do things that they just simply can't. However, there are things that animals can do. For example, pigeons are able to sort objects into categories or concepts. Okay, so that means that if a pigeon can do it, so can you. Okay, so let's not think, I can't think of it. No. You're being lazy. Stop being lazy. Think about this. Okay, when presented with new or never before seen chairs, pigeons reliably peck the key that represents chairs when they are doing these sorting exercises. Okay, so the pigeon knows what a chair is, and it'll be able to recognize something that it's never seen before as a chair, because that looks like every other chair that I've seen. That is a chair. Okay. An African gray parrot named Alex was able to name and categorize objects, as well as comprehend numbers up to 6. He could add 2 small clusters of objects and announce the sum. He could indicate which of 2 numbers was greater. Okay, so they do have a small amount of numerical ability. Okay, are they doing algebra? No. Are they doing anything beyond the number 6? No. But hey, a bird with a brain the size of a peanut can add numbers together. That means you can too. Okay. Chimpanzees are able to display insight. Insight is where you're able to come up with a solution to a problem. Okay, that moment of insight, that aha. Okay, for example, one experiment had a chimp in a cage and was given a short stick. Just out of range of the short stick was a piece of fruit. Okay, on the other side of the cage was a much longer stick. Okay, within the range of the short stick. So the chimp, after struggling to get the fruit with the short stick, eventually figured out, if I use the short stick to get the long stick, then I can get the long stick to get the fruit. Blink. And they went and did that. Okay. So chimpanzees are capable of the same insight into problem solving that we are. Okay. So we are not as special as we like to think of ourselves as being. Okay. But again, there are still a lot of things that we can do that these animals can't, or at least we don't think that they can to this point. Chimpanzees also use tools in the wild. Some chimps use a stick or reeds to fish termites out of termite mounds. Okay, so they take a little stick and they jam it into the middle of the termite mound, and they pull it out, and then they eat the termites off of the stick. Okay. Now, when we talk about not only tool use but also culture, you can also look at it from the standpoint of how are they eating the termites off of the stick. One group of chimps will eat them right off the stick. The other ones will pluck them off. What's the difference between the two chimps? One lives on one side of the river, one lives on the other. Okay, so this is a cultural manifestation. And I know it's like eating bugs off a stick is part of their culture. Yes, I get what you're saying, but it's still a cultural thing because they could just all eat them right off of the stick. Why do some of them pick them off? It's because that's how they learn from their parents and how their parents learn from their parents, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And on one side of the river, they do it one way, and on the other side of the river, they do it another. Okay. Another thing is tool use involves like breaking open nuts. Okay. And on one side of the river, they'll use a rock to open up the nuts, and the other, they'll beat it with a log to open up the nuts. Okay. Again, it's tool use. It is cultural. It gets passed on to the next generation. That is part of the thinking process. Now, when it comes to language, this is where we have some real difficulties because it's hard to understand exactly what these animals might be thinking or doing or saying. But without a doubt, animals have shown impressive comprehension in communication. In the late 1960s, 2 researchers taught sign language to a chimpanzee. The vocabulary of the chimp was extremely limited, though. 8 vocabularies were roughly similar to that of a 2-year-old. So they were getting, 2-word sentences, but they were able to communicate with the chimpanzee. It was not as easy to soak up the language. Their vocabularies grew slowly and with great difficulty. But when those chimps had children, they passed the sign language on to the children. Okay, so their offspring were able to learn the same sign language, and it wasn't the researchers teaching it to them. It was the mom and dad chimp. Okay, so there are abilities for animals to not only develop language, but they may be speaking and we just don't understand it yet. Okay, there is a lot of evidence to say that dolphins have a specific language that they are actually speaking back and forth to one another. I think I recently read something somewhere about how we are getting close to being able to I don't want to say translate what they're saying, but to understand what the sounds that they are making mean. And if we can understand another animal on this planet, that's pretty impressive. Okay. So all of these things are a part of the thought processes of cognition. And remember, cognition is basically all of the unseen things going on behind your skull. Okay. The things that you can't just open up and go, look, it's moving. That's thought. It's not moving. It's happening, and it's happening all the time. Okay. You think, therefore you are. All right. So